Okay. And we just want to welcome everyone tonight to our Blue Wave conversation. And tonight we'll be talking about autism awareness. And we're so happy to have you all tune in tonight to our, our brief, short, long, whatever it's going to be conversation, because the conversation needs to happen. And tonight we also have a special guest with us, but I want to introduce our regulars. I'm Mary Hayes. We have Jamie Nedick, Vanessa Maddox, and Kim Newman. Jamie, if you want to take it away, introduce our guest, because I know she has a lot of information, her and Vanessa, and we just want to go dive straight on in.
It is my absolute pleasure to introduce to you Teresa Thomas. Teresa is at her corporation. She is the program lead for the Neurodiverse Talent Enablement Program. She has a long history of advocacy for neurodiverse populations. She has been a house parent in a group home for adults with high support needs, is the parent of an adult on the autism spectrum, and is active in her corporation's inclusion and diversity programs. Teresa is currently designing and leading a federal neurodiversity, cyber workforce program, as well as spreading efforts to pilot a neurodiversity co-op program. These are both focused on providing opportunities for autistic individuals in cybersecurity and other high-tech roles. I'm very pleased to introduce her, and I will say, as a labor economist, this is something that's of great interest to me, because we have such tremendous untapped talents among the neurodiverse community, and I am also the mother of two children who have fall under the neurodiversity sort of header or spectrum. And so it's my great pleasure to introduce Teresa so she can talk to us about what's going on and how we as parents or aunts or friends of either parents with children on the spectrum or who are neurodivergent, which also includes things like dyslexia and dyspraxia and some other things, can support our loved ones. So Teresa, welcome.
Thanks, it's great to be here. So how do we want to go? So do it, Vanessa, do you want to kick us off? Or?
I'll kick it off. I asked Mary to, if we could discuss this topic because it is Autism Awareness Month. And my husband, Roger, and I have successfully raised, we think we've been successful, has successfully raised a child on the spectrum, our oldest son, and he was diagnosed at age 2.5 on the spectrum, but he was specifically diagnosed with hyperlexia with oh God, I'm drawing a blank, good Lord. Hyperlexia with developmental delay and social skills deficiency is what they called it back in the day. I don't like to say that anymore, but that was their diagnosis. And so basically with Connor's condition, he could read books. He was reading books before he could speak a full sentence. So when we discovered, well, we didn't discover it, okay? First kid, right? So what do we know? So luckily for me, and I hate the word luck, but we were blessed to have my mother-in-law and my eldest sister, who were both educators and social workers. And so the first person that came to us was my sister. She said, hey, she said, listen, the baby's not talking. I said, what are you talking about? Because she had babysat for us. She said, the baby's 2 and he's not talking. I said, shoot, that kid talks. When he wants something, he goes, and we get it for him. So my sister, in her infinite wisdom, she's no longer with us, but in her infinite wisdom, she said, fool, the baby ain't talking. She said, go find out why he's not talking. So we started looking into it, but what do we know? We didn't know anything. The word autism wasn't even a word just 18 years ago. When we were growing up, they called you slow, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or they used the R word, which I'm not going to use. So I was talking to my mother-in-law after my sister and I talked. I was talking to my mother-in-law. She said, "Sweetie, just call Child Fine." I said, "What's Child Fine?" And so she said, "Here's the number." So let me tell you, my sister and my mother-in-law helped us save Connor 18 years ago. If we hadn't called Child Fine, he would not have graduated from high school last year with honors. He would not have thrived throughout his school career, kindergarten to 12th grade, if we hadn't made that call. Of course, we had challenges, a lot of people that we know said to us, "Don't let them label your baby. Ain't nothing wrong with him." How do you know?
Mm-hmm.
Are you a professional? Shut the hell up. I don't want to hear it. So I lost a lot of family members because of that. And the other side of the coin was I had other family members whose kids were clearly on the spectrum and they never got them help. They didn't want their children labeled, right? So you just can't make people do what they don't want to do. So I gave it up. So I focused on our kid. So he went into early childhood special ed. We put our baby on the bus at age 3 to go from Leesburg to Ashburn, those of you that are in the area. Long ride for a little kid, 25-minute ride, right? So we put him into this program, and within 3 months, he was talking. So as you know, Teresa, and I'm gonna let you pick up from here, that autism is like a puzzle. It's a spectrum. You could be a high functioning person on the spectrum like my son is, or you could be totally nonverbal and not able to speak, and you need every waking moment of your day, someone has to take care of you. I firmly believe that if we hadn't called that number, we wouldn't be sitting here talking about this right now.
Mm-hmm.
So I beg anyone that's listening to this show, if you think your child has a developmental delay of any form, I don't care how old they are, call me or Google Child Fine in your home state and make the call. This is not about you and your relatives that think they know everything. This is about your kid. Yeah. This is about getting those early interventions. And believe me, I'm not educated in this area like you, Teresa. I don't do this for a living, but I feel like I'm an expert because I just dumped into the deep end of the pool with everything I could possibly learn about my son's condition. And because we did that early on, I'm able to walk into anybody's house, look at the child, and tell you if they're on the spectrum or not. And I can tell you when an adult is on the spectrum who was never treated.
Yeah, and I probably see it where it isn't sometimes too, but yeah. And if it's not called Child Find in your area, it will be called Early Childhood Services or Early Childhood Intervention. Every state has it. That's exactly where we started with our son too. We were in Texas, so it wasn't great, but it was there and it was free, and your kid's gonna get a label. Your kid's gonna get a label. If you don't get a label of autism that gets your kid help, your kid gets a label of stupid or defiant or weird, which is if you're on the spectrum and don't require as many supports, chances are you're getting a weird, quirky at best label anyway. So those don't come with very helpful things, but an autism of diagnosis will. what I normally do when I do this, I give this talk, like Jamie has said, she's heard it a million times, apparently. She groupie, that's great. I do it around the company a lot, but I always start with level setting for folks like Mary, who says she doesn't know much about the area. So I'm going to start with neurodiversity definition. Neurodiversity is diversity in our brains. It just means we all think differently. Some of us are creative thinkers, some of us are linear thinkers, some of us are introverts, some of us are extroverts. Our brains all work different. That is diversity in our neurons. That is neurodiversity. When you're a little more diverse than most folks, where it causes.
Question while you're getting ready to go into that.
Yeah.
Can you be an extrovert and autistic, or introvert and autistic? You don't just have to be a child or an adult that just doesn't want to socialize. Could you be a person also that is an extrovert and still be autistic? Because like I have no knowledge on it, so that's a question I always had.
Yes, it's most of the folks I know tend to be introverts, but there are some. And when you get them spun up on something they're really interested in, we'll talk about that here in a minute, you're going to find out just how extroverted they can be. So neurodiversity is yes, that's a great question. Neurodiversity is diversity in the way we think. Neurodivergence is what they call it when that difference causes issues. So that's going to be your dyslexia, dyspraxia, ADHD, Tourette's, autism, any of those things in brain function that cause problems. And then autism itself actually is not that old of a diagnosis if you look at all the other mental health diagnoses out there. And like Vanessa was saying, you know, even when my son was born 24 years ago, it wasn't a thing. It was just starting when he was about 4 when he got diagnosed. But it refers to a developmental disability that tends to affect traditionally communication, social interaction, and repetitive behaviors. Now that's in the DSM, and I've got my friend Dr. Robertson, who is on the spectrum, has asked me a couple of times to be a little more clear. When it comes to adults, it is the way it affects your life is in sensory motor functioning, in executive functioning, in social communication, and socialization. So executive functioning, like the 4 steps you have to do to get to getting out of bed in time in the morning, determining what's most important to work on. ADHD, I'm ADHD, or ADD. So I have those issues too. So I live that, right? Sensory motor is that this is what you think of a lot of times when you think of autism. You think of that they can't stand bright lights, they don't like loud noises, they'll cover their ears and rock. Sometimes that's where you get that introvert coming from, because my friend Helena described it to me as all the sensory input coming into her comes in at sort of the same level. So I'm here talking to her. The car outside my house on the street going by, that hits her brain at the same level of input as my conversation. The kids in the other room arguing, my ice maker or dropping ice, it's all hitting her at once at that same level. She can't like ignore it the same way a lot of neurotypical, by the way, is another phrase, people who are not neurodivergent. So that's where you get that sensory overwhelm, and some of the socialization things are really interesting as well. And that's where you're going to get the weird. And most people, like Vanessa and I, will go in and go, yeah, he's on the spectrum. But most folks are going to go, yeah, he's just weird. And I've heard, like Dr. Temple Grandin, one of the most famous autistic self-advocates out there, I've heard her talk about visiting NASA. And she's like, those guys are all on the spectrum. They are so weird. So funny to hear her talk about it. But
I worked there for 2 years, can confirm.
Yeah. The company we work at too. Yes, we're social engineers. Not social engineers, but
systems engineers.
Systems engineers. And it was an S word. I totally lost
engineers.
It. Systems engineers. They're all on the spectrum.
And maybe that's why it's such a pleasure to hear you speak, because public speaking maybe isn't the strong suit of most of us there, myself included. It's hard.
Super common. but they are super, super great at other things. And that's where, so my job, I run 2 programs. One is an internship program for students, college students on the spectrum. I recruit heavily from schools that have a strong autism support programs, and so that they can get extra support from their schools. I train up their managers, I train up their coworkers, I train them before the interviews, give the students all the questions before they come in for the interview so they know what's going to happen. I teach people to listen for what these students know, not to judge by what they see. And it is a really great program for the students. I'm not in it for the students. I love the students. This is my manager apprenticeship program. I'm teaching these managers how not to be douche to people on spectrum. And that can be, and I find myself doing that. You slide into behaviors that judge. If somebody takes a long time to answer your question, you assume they don't know the answer, but that's not often the case. And, we had a student that we interviewed the other day. He's like classic when I'm trying to teach managers how to interview. This kid is in a t-shirt, and usually they're dressed up, when students, they have their tie and everything. He's in a t-shirt, he's half shaved. You can tell he's probably dyspraxic. He just missed half of his face when he was shaving. And he's holding a stuffed animal. He's a junior in college, by the way, holding a stuffed octopus, which will come into play here in a minute. That would have been an auto no for all of these guys before. This guy was freaking brilliant. Brilliant. He was going for a data management position. He had done that before in an internship before. He knew all about cleaning the data and sorting the data. He knew all about what it took. He knew why. He tied the record for the world's fastest virtual machine in Minecraft computer. He built a virtual computer in a virtual world, and somehow manipulated the pieces to be the fastest processing system anybody had ever built within that world. He off the charts amazing, and the team was like thrilled. At the end, somebody asked him about the octopus because he had mentioned at the beginning, I love octopuses, my favorite animal. And somebody said, "What do you love about octopuses?" And I was like, "Oh God, here we go." I know. So this is, and we all got a great lesson on how amazing they are. But here's the thing. He's into data management. And when folks on the spectrum are into something, encyclopedic is not the word. There's not a word. It's insane how they are going to know everything about it, every little detail, and they're going to dive into it so deep that you're going to have to remind them to go get lunch, and they're going to work it to death, whatever you need them to do, which can be a problem. But that focus on super detail, which is also a hallmark, and that latching onto things and that deep dive. One of my friends is and have you heard Adam talk, Jamie? Have you heard it any other times?
Yeah.
One of our coworkers on the spectrum. He does cyber for airplanes. It's a thing. Every manual that they've made for those systems within the planes, he has them memorized because he read them once, and he was into it. And his whole team just calls him up if they have a question because he knows it. So so my job is to tell managers it's worth the risk to take on somebody who's a little quirky in an interview, because what you're going to get, chances are, is going to be gold. If they're just average, they're going to come to work every day and do their job and go home and come back the next day and do their job. And wouldn't that be amazing if you had somebody that just did their job every day? That's like worst case scenario, right? But oftentimes they just see the world differently than you or I. And that is so vital when you're trying to solve world problems. You need somebody who thinks differently than you and is going to dig down into those details. So we're also running, like you said, running a pilot at a federal agency right now. NGA, they're very public about it, helping them learn how to recruit for autism and how we run a different interview process for these full-time roles where we do a week-long boot camp so that folks can relax and really shine with what they can do. So they can learn about the employer, in this case, the agency, and the agency can learn about them. And we put them in, we give them simulated work to do. NGA had some simulations that they ran. And we also had them build a pretend nonprofit or something as a team, so we could see how they work together. But and now they're doing an internship for a few months, and then at the end of which the agency will hire them on over. But in the meantime, the managers have all been trained, their coworkers have been trained, security team's been trained. The guys who do their security clearance interviews have been trained, so that folks know if he's not making eye contact, it doesn't necessarily mean he's lying.
Or
If he thinks about he's not being disrespectful. If he stops when you ask him a question, you know, if he doesn't want to be touched, it doesn't mean he's being disrespectful, you know. So, but it's starting people talking, and it's starting people wondering and asking like this right now. It's started people going, tell me about that. And so,
Well, I think what you're, go ahead.
I was gonna say my end goal is to change the conversation. Yeah. What does it mean to be autistic? What does it mean to hire for autism? That just all needs to change.
As you and Jamie know, a lot of the Intel 3-letter agencies, right? They are all engaging in some sort of grand recruiting effort for people on the spectrum. And I think it is outstanding.
We're behind. Globally, we're behind on that, by the way.
We are very much behind. We're very much behind. And Teresa, I do want to talk to you after this regarding the program you just told us about, because I want to get Connor a security clearance. I want to help him get a security clearance so that he can write his own ticket down the road. Now, he actually wants to be an actor, and he's very much into theater, was in theater all 4 years, which really, really helped him come out of that shell a great deal. And he's a musician, he's a master guitarist, and the guitar helped the dexterity. He had very bad dexterity issues with his fingers, and that pretty much is gone. We also put them in Taekwondo, which was probably the best decision we made in their childhood years, because it was such discipline and order to their lives, both of them. James, Connor's little brother, is not on the spectrum, but they did everything together. So, and the Koreans don't play, all right? They were both fluent in Korean while going from white belt to black belts. So, and listen, folks, we didn't have no guide on this, right? Nobody was in my ear saying, oh, put him in Taekwondo. Oh, put him in guitar. Oh, put him in, no. We just had to kind of figure it out. And it's hard. It was very hard. But I encourage, like I said before, I encourage parents, if you get that early intervention, it's just all gonna come to you. It really is.
I think that something that you said early on, Vanessa, is really important. I don't have a direct connection with someone in my circle that is on the spectrum, but I have been put in positions where I've had to engage and or mentor. And I kind of found out about how to interact with them by accident. There was no professional training or anyone there to kind of guide me. It just, like you said, I just saw something that just didn't quite fit. And so I started to ask questions, and then the questions led to this is what it was. And then later on, as I was introduced to other people, I was able to identify, you know, the possibilities. But I think one of the things that you said early on is probably the most essential for people who are the family and loved ones and community that support those with autism, is to first understand that it's not about us. and to also understand that it's not for us to try to change them, rather us change ourselves and our expectations, and understanding that they, like you said, just see things differently, and not to hold them in comparison to other people and wanting them to match. And I think that's probably the hardest part.
One of
So
my favorite quotes is from Holly Robinson Peete. I'm sure she didn't invent it. I heard it from her. I wouldn't change my son for the world, but I would change the world for my son.
And I think that there's something to be said too about understanding those of us with children who are neurodivergent in any way. The one, you're not alone, and the prevalence of this, I think, becomes important both as a parent and as I'm a labor economist. So it's 1 in 6 children, because I also the person who provides the stats on the program, is diagnosed between 13 and 17 is diagnosed with a developmental disability, and about 1 in 54 children has been diagnosed as being on the autism spectrum. And what's interesting to me about that is my gut is that number is going to go up because it's 4 times more prevalent among boys than girls. And girls often present very differently than boys on the autism spectrum. So there's a lot of missed cases of neurodivergence among women. And so if you think about how prevalent this is, and the underemployment rate among people on the autism spectrum,
Insane.
specifically to what you talked about. And these are really talented people. I think I heard from you, it's that most people who are qualified in cyber who have autism solve, I think you said 6 times the rate in one of the talks I saw.
They're 40% faster.
Yeah.
40% faster. And that's a really great point that you brought up, Jamie. And I think it's worth a whole other podcast. There are a couple of factors. It's not just boys more than girls. It's white boys more than black boys. It's there's a lot that goes into that. So girls, and this is all anecdotal. I don't know the science on this one, but I've talked to a lot of women, tend to be diagnosed schizophrenic instead of autistic for the same set of characteristics. And so they have a really hell of a hard time getting through life until they get the right diagnosis. They're institutionalized and all kinds of crazy stuff. And if you're brown, you're diagnosed with defiance disorder.
Yeah.
Or just, problematic, or ADHD. ADHD also really, really high numbers instead of autism for the same set of behaviors. And there's so many things, like I said, there's a whole show worth on that about why that happens. But gosh, I'd love to talk about how to fix that. I don't know the answers, but I'm asking that question a whole lot these days.
And I think the point you brought up, though, about the misdiagnosis is tied back to what Vanessa said earlier. Early intervention work. My kids started early intervention before they were 1.5 years old. They were nonverbal, and they taught us a bunch of things. We learned to sign with my children.
We did too.
And so my children were able to communicate with me, which helped more to eat, milk. I don't remember all of it, but they were able to communicate with.
Yeah.
They were still able to communicate with me, and that cut down on tantrums and frustration because they could talk to me. They could communicate to me and to their caregivers about what they wanted. And so that early intervention piece becomes really important. In later interventions, if you give someone drugs for schizophrenia, if they weren't schizophrenic, they're now going to have a bunch of behaviors that look more like schizophrenia. And so getting the right diagnosis and understanding what's going on is really, really important. And, removing that stigma too, and it's not about you as a parent. It's, removing that stigma and understanding this. For autism, it's 1 in 54 and probably higher, and developmental disabilities is 1 in 6. This is everywhere. We all have, there's no such thing as really a typical person. We all have variations, but understanding how your child is different and how to get that child help so that we can sort of get over these humps of all people with disabilities as a community are not individually all, but individually, people with disabilities are underemployed in the United States in dramatic numbers. And people with autism in particular, because to your point, we look for those things in job interviews, like, do you make eye contact? Do you answer right away? Are you dressed right away? Are you following all these arbitrary societal norms that have nothing to do with job performance?
Yeah.
So there's my rant as a labor economist. Tie it to what has to do with job performance. Holding that stuffed octopus does not mean you can't be a kick-ass data scientist.
Well, let me say this about the employment field. I've been in recruiting all my life. I own a recruiting firm. And so I work a lot with people with high level clearances, and I headhunt them every day, all day. And what I have been trying to teach clients and people that I work for, if I find a person that I can tell over the phone that they're on the spectrum, you better hire them, because they're going to be the best employee you're going to find, and they're going to be loyal, and they're going to be dedicated, and they love structure, and they love routine.
There's going to be quirks.
Of course, there's going to be quirks,
But
but you're going to get the best damn employee you've ever seen. And I can already see that in Connor's job. And he is totally adverse to change. Don't change his routine. Don't change his milk. Don't change his cereal. You're going to get it. So as he's growing, we're learning, and that's brought us a long way. And the other thing is about companies that have not embraced this community, because it is a community. Shame on y'all. Get it together. Get it together.
Autism at Work Playbook.
I don't
There's a
know.
free download from Microsoft. Autism at Work Playbook. It's Microsoft
There you
SAP,
go.
University of
Microsoft,
Washington.
one of the
60 pages,
Yes.
mostly pictures, soup to
Vanessa.
nuts, how to start a program.
Yeah, and
How
there's
does
a
the
bunch of
you talked
different
about-
resources that we want to make sure that people have. So like the Autism at Work Employer Roundtable is a great one. There's accommodation ideas for autism on the Job Accommodation Network, which I am a huge advocate for. I've done work directly with them on some other issues, and whatever you're looking for, if you need a reasonable accommodation, the Job Accommodation Network, not only do they have great resources.
AskJan.org.
AskJan.org, yes, they will help you. And for example, my family is Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, and when they didn't have that in there, and I talked to them, they added it. They did the research. They put in a whole bunch of stuff just for EDS. And people with EDS we have sensory issues and tend to be on the spectrum. Many of us, not all of us, but there's a link there. So they were actually very helpful with understanding the complexities of that. There's also a neurodiversity in the workplace webpage. I will put all these links in at the end of the conversation, and a bunch of other tools that are really good for managing autistic employees, et cetera, around the globe. So this is something where we have to work together, and there's a cost to us as a society. Even like in Kim's case, if you don't know somebody with autism, if we are underemploying an entire segment of our populations with these extraordinary talents, there's a loss to national security, there's a loss to innovation, which impacts the economy. Of course, as a parent, and as I have a nephew who's on the spectrum as well, I want to see my loved ones succeed and have meaningful lives filled with joy and a sense of accomplishment. But also, this is important to our country. This is important to national security, particularly in the area that you work in, Teresa, which is cyber. We have a tremendous shortage in areas like cyber, quantum, artificial intelligence, biotechnology, and a lot of times high functioning folks on the spectrum are, to your earlier point, really good at solving these problems faster than neurotypical people.
Yeah.
So how do we, taking a step back and tapping onto what Jamie said, also put the resources in for those that are trying to navigate first being presented with the possibility of their child being on the spectrum? I think, Vanessa, like you said, you were lucky that you had family that could help you navigate, and Jamie, but those people in certain demographics, they just don't, and their children are getting classified in the wrong categories and not getting the help that they need. So can we also put together, I think, Teresa, you mentioned one of them early on.
You mean the early signs, how to recognize the early signs.
Yes.
So Teresa can chime in, but the first sign is that your child isn't saying at least 20 to 30 words by age 2. And the second sign, which was a sign for us, is the eye contact, right? It's very hard for some folks on the spectrum to look at you straight on in your face. Connor still has that challenge, but he's much better than he was. The noise, what do they call that thing that they do in the movie theater? They do it in the movie theaters now, where they lower the volume in the movie theaters so that people on the spectrum don't get upset by the really loud noise. I can't think of the term they use.
They all call it something different, but
Yeah, they all call it something different. But because Connor is high functioning on the spectrum, a lot of the early signs, he grew out of a lot of that. Because with a combination of what we were doing for him outside of school, the teachers and the professionals in the school, and then all of the kids that he went into kindergarten with, they all came from kindergarten to 12th grade together. So everyone knew him. And the girls had him quite spoiled in class. Quick story. One day his teacher called and she said, "Miss Max, no problem with Connor. I'm just calling to tell you a funny story." I was like, "God, thank you, Jesus." And I said, "Oh, what's that?" She said, "We were taking a test today. And I was asking all the kids if they had a pen or had a pencil. And I got to Connor and I said, 'Connor, do you have a pencil?' He said, 'No.' He said, every girl in the classroom stood up and said, 'Here's a pencil, Connor.'" I was like, "Oh, that's not even autism. That's just, he's just a player. That's just him loving the girls, right?" So when in going through this with him, we don't know whether it's him being 18 or whether it's spectrum, right? Hard to tell sometimes.
Yeah, puberty's a
So
killer.
puberty is a killer. Good God Almighty. And he did everything late. Everything was delayed. He potty trained late. He didn't walk till he was 15 months old. But I think he didn't walk because he didn't have to, because the babysitter just carried him around everywhere. So we're never sure. So their brains is just so fascinating.
Yeah.
How they're geniuses. I mean,
Some.
we've had him tested through every test we had. He went through junior Mensa, blew out all the tests, but it was the social skills. So that's always a challenge.
I know Mary wanted to finish us off pretty early tonight, but I wanted to point, and there's a lot of politics here. We can get into that later. If you know adults on the spectrum, there's a lot of things you don't talk about. The puzzle piece is passé now. You're not allowed to have a puzzle piece. Autism Speaks is a big fat no-no. However, if you're just now trying to find out if your child is on the spectrum, or you're starting to wonder, autismspeaks.org has a ton of resources, and they're going to help you find somebody in your area close by that you can get access to. They're going to give you, it's just a data dump, all kinds of help, all kinds of knowledge. So if you know an adult on the spectrum, don't mention Autism Speaks. This is bad. However, as a resource for parents just now diving in, they're fantastic. So
I think there's something worth mentioning too, that I don't want to go into open that whole can of worms, but just being sensitive how people who are with high function autism, there's this idea that there should be a cure for being different is really painful and hurtful to people. And so I just think we want to state outright that we need to be aware that not all neurodivergent people have any desire to be neurotypical. And when you say you want to cure what makes them different and what makes them special, that can be really harmful and hurtful.
That goes to people trying to fix people all over again. Not liking you for your difference. It's just like not liking you for your color or your sex or anything else. And I know I said I was going to end early, but I mean, if you ladies want to continue the conversation, feel free to do that. If you have to hit on a topic, I'm pretty open. But that is just to hear that they want to do a cure. And I've heard something like that before too. That's just sickening. And I think it's more sickening now with a lot of the things that we're facing, when we're seeing that people are judged by who they love or what they believe or what they look like or what they have or what they don't have. This is just another aspect of that. And to think that this really affects a lot of children is just not acceptable.
And there's I get it. As a mom, if your kid can't talk and he's 6 and he's still not talking, and you know his life is going to be hard, you want to fix that for him. Or if he's, you know, can't get his motor skills, you know,
Yeah.
connected with his brain, something, you want to fix that for your baby. And so
Right.
I think that's where that comes from, but it can lead to some really harmful things. So, and you hear about ABA is a therapy that you can look into for your kid, but that is an anathema for adults who have been through it as children. They will tell you it's like conversion therapy. It's the same kind of, you know, hurtful. So listen to the community. That's another thing to say. Here's another, I've learned all kinds of things, right? Okay, no puzzle pieces. We use the infinity symbol, rainbow colored infinity symbol, or rainbow colored brain. Folks on the spectrum are 40% more likely to be LGBTQ than others. Fun fact. Also, we don't say high functioning, low functioning. We say needs more supports or needs less supports, because it is a
That's
spectrum, but it is not a linear spectrum. It's like color
yes.
wheel spectrum. And so, you know, my friend, the PhD who works at the Department of Labor, can't process auditory speech very well. Right. So that is this stretch that makes, you know, it's not linear at all. So there's so many hot buttons you can push unknowingly. I tell people, you're probably going to make a mistake, probably going to do it wrong. Do it.
That's helpful to me, because
Just do it wrong.
my sister is a physician, and her son is has what we used to call Asperger's, and she refers to him as high functioning.
Right, and most people still do, but you're going to catch from the self-advocacy community, and there's a couple of groups, ASAN, and it is an acronym that I will get wrong if I try to tell you. It's ASAN. It is a self-advocacy network, and there's a couple of others that, you know, if you hang out with them or watch what they're doing, you'll hear what their preferred terminology is for them anyway. The answer is always ask the person.
So I do want to, the other thing you hit on that I think is so important is, how do we build neurodivergence into our diversity, equity, and inclusion programs? Because I think that's an important thing. And usually when we think about diversity, equity, and inclusion, people don't generally think about neurodivergence. And the same way DE&I drives innovation and corporate performance, it will drive it more so if we actually include everyone, and that includes people who are neurodivergent. How can we build that into those programs?
Another saying that I love, I'm just going to throw this in before I start talking again. My friend Scott says, autism is not, we are not a programming error. We're a different operating system.
There you go. Yes.
It's not a bug, it's a feature.
It's right. Well, and it's, yeah, you just have to learn how to program in that language. But so the ultimate goal is not to need a program, right? That's the ultimate goal for all of these. It's just the way business happens. We don't have to have a program. Which is why I consider my internship program a manager apprenticeship program, so that it becomes part of the culture. I have the luxury of starting a program after SAP and DXC and Microsoft and EY and JP Morgan Chase and Ford and blah, 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 blah. There's a whole group of these guys. And I get to watch what they've done and learn from them. Right now, they are all at this precipice, all the bigger ones, where, you know, you've got 200 folks that you've hired in. That's 200 out of the millions and millions. How do you scale that with all the supports and all of the, you know, the special boot camp style interview that they do? And it needs to be woven into the way you always do everything. There's a bridge there. There's a gap. There's not a bridge. It's just a chasm. They're trying to figure out how to leap that chasm. And I have the luxury of knowing ahead of time that that's coming. And so as we now, I mean, my plan was to do an internship program, learn how to do it for a couple of years, and then build in a full scale hiring program and do that for a couple of years, and then offer it to the government agencies and do that. We skipped to the end for several reasons, but we just hired somebody who didn't make it into our federal program. They had to down select. And so a couple didn't make it, and we hired them at MITRE. The team is so over the moon because the answers to the standard question they ask every single candidate, they ask them to solve a problem and talk about it. And his answer was totally off the wall and different from anybody else's and spot on. Of course, right? I've been preaching this sermon. You just didn't believe me. But we don't have a program for him. What we had was managers who were trained up because they'd interviewed some interns who knew what to look for.
Right.
We knew how to build a support system. We actually right now are in the process of training up our health supports, our health services team, and our security teams for the offices.
So
HR is
I
getting
do want
trained
to
up.
hit on something there, the issue of security and HR concerns and how that's different, because I think that's really important. And we're seeing this bleed over into some incidents that have happened with law enforcement not being adequately trained on this either. And that's really important and scary to me as someone who loves someone with autism.
Yeah. And some of our security team actually just this last week, as we're doing the training, said, why is this just now a thing? Why haven't we
Right.
always been trained on this? Why hasn't this been done for years? And the answer is we're just now catching up. It's science, I mean, the medical field is just now catching up. We just, like we said, autism is a diagnosis. It's not that old. But yeah.
And the
it
organization we
terrifies me.
work for is, I would almost say, predominantly people who are not neurotypical. It really is. It's just, it's part of the organization that we work for. So if we were behind as an entire organization full of those of us who have some trouble processing sometimes the way other people do, we're behind. Where does that leave organizations that are more likely to not have neurodivergent people?
And the police,
their
oh my
staff?
God, the police have got, I don't know. Is another one of my mantras, one dragon at a time. I haven't hit this dragon. There's so many issues with police right now, but yeah, there have been so many law enforcement stories that we hear that are terrifying for those of us with kids that we send out into the world. And I know that Rockville trains their police very specifically on autism awareness and how to deal with folks on the spectrum if they encounter them. I don't know who else around here does. I'm sure some do. I know that Melwood, which is a social service provider in Maryland and North Virginia, they're the ones doing our training. I know they have a training ready to go because they have done some first responder trainings. I think with fire departments as well, because that's, you go into a burning building and somebody's, standing in the corner covering their ears. You got to figure out how to get them out.
Melwood's been around what, well over 30 years.
60 years. 60 years.
Oh gosh.
Yeah.
Yeah, doing this work. And when I lived in Maryland, they were very prominent in the community. They were everywhere. And yeah, there are several organizations that have been doing this work for a long time. And oh, by the way, Jenny McCarthy did not cure her son of autism. So whoever believes that.
And vaccines did not give anyone autism ever. The only thing vaccines cause is adults. That vaccine could cause your child to grow into an adult. Not vaccinating could prevent that. So please, I mentioned my sister has a child on the spectrum. She is a physician. Her husband is a physician. They vaccinate their children. Doctors vaccinate at a higher rate than people who are not doctors because they know it's the safest thing we can do for our kids.
Yeah.
Well, on that note, I want to just ask one question before we go. I'm not going to do an after show. I'm just going to take the next 2 minutes and I want to ask you, Vanessa and Teresa, for those of us, because I work in school and I know a little bit, but I don't know a whole lot, right? So this whole session was education. I didn't say much. I purposely was listening a lot. What are some of the words we should not use? What are some of the things we should not say that would cause a reaction that we don't want, or being seen as insensitive? What are some of those triggers that you could provide us before we go?
You don't want to say retarded ever. You don't want to say slow ever.
You don't want to say weird, strange, ever.
That's just rude anyway.
Well,
Yeah,
yeah,
can
it
we
is.
remove the R word from our
But
vocabulary?
when
Just
we were
don't,
growing
it's a
up,
slur.
That's
when
just
we were
rude.
when we were growing up, Mary, our generation, those are the words they use.
We used it for fun in the 80s. Oh, he's sounding
So,
yeah, we used to say it.
yeah, those are some of them.
Mhm.
Yeah,
And
add the R word to your list of slurs. Don't say it. Not when you think something's not cool or something. Don't say it. It's as a mother of a child with severe learning disability, don't say it. It hurts his feelings. It's hurtful,
Yeah.
even if you're not saying about him.
We I teach two different things when I do my Autism 101 trainings. Anything that could conceivably be accompanied by a pat on the head when you say it, don't say
Don't
it
say it
to anybody.
Right. That's a good one. I like that.
Like you're so inspirational, or you know, the other one is a little bit different than I think. There's something
smarter than you. How about that?
This is a little different than the question you were asking, Mary, but it is something that I think a lot of folks find helpful when you're dealing with folks, or when you're working with folks, or you're living with folks who are on the spectrum. Folks on the spectrum won't make assumptions. That's part of the social thing. You know, you walk in a room, you see how everybody's dressed, you assume that's how you're supposed to dress. Folks on the spectrum are not going to make that assumption.
Right.
And so if you catch yourself thinking, everybody knows that, stop and ask yourself, why does everybody know that? Does everybody know that? What is it that everybody knows? Can you articulate it?
Yeah.
Stop, articulate it, and then articulate it to the person. You know, if they're not catching it and you think they're just weird and not getting along. So that's one of the biggest helps, I think.
Teresa, Vanessa, we did have a question from somebody in our audience. If you're a parent of a child on the spectrum and you need a breather, do you have any suggestions on how to get a sitter or something? How do you find care if your child isn't in full-time care, but how do you find appropriate sort of ad hoc care for a child with special needs? And I will say one of my best friends has a child on the spectrum, and there's like 4 of us who can come babysit him. His name is Andrew, and he's awesome. He's an awesome kid. He's gonna be 14 next week, but he does still need supervision, but he's 14 years old. So he's in this huge body, and I can come over and watch him. His aunts can come over and watch, but there's just a handful of people. And if you don't have that handful of people, how do you find care on an ad hoc basis?
If you're in Loudoun County where we lived, there's an organization called the it's abbreviated MSADS, and I know I'm going to screw it up, Mental Health and a Developmental Agency. That's wrong, but that's basically what it is. And I joined the board of MSADS, which is called the Community Services Board. I've been on it for 2.5 years. And I joined it because of my son, because I wanted to be on the ground learning everything I could learn about him now as an adult and what services are available. So I would encourage, if you're a child or adult child on the spectrum, you want to go get services, you want to find out more, just reach out to your local community services board. They're in every state.
You can also Google autism respite care.
Correct.
And a lot of times the state can help you with respite care if you just don't ever get a break and you need somebody that can come in and help. Or I haven't done this myself. I have, like Vanessa said earlier, I've been really blessed to have people that were able to help me. Our church was a really big help when our son was young. Half the services we got him, I could not have afforded. My husband was a preacher.
Correct.
I had no money, but the church helped with that a lot. So the state did a lot as well. And I think if you Google respite care, you should be able to help.
The state
no place to start.
Well, I'll just talk about Loudoun. Loudoun County has a list of providers, child care providers that you can Google as well. And now a lot more of them are trained and equipped to sit with kids on the spectrum. no matter where they are on it.
That brings up the other side of that point, Jamie. Being that person, the one I could trust to take my son for 2 hours so that I could breathe, because 20 hours of the day I was keeping him from climbing on top of the fridge or getting into the knife drawer or running down the street toward the highway
Or escaping the house. I mean, that's
I had to
happened with
hide the
Andrew.
keys. I had to lock from the inside and hide the keys. Yes. And
Yeah, we had wandering issues. We had wandering issues.
yes, it's so scary. It's so scary. I lost him several. We used to live in East Africa and I lost him twice.
And that's very common among, I mean, I think we also need to say that running and then and hiding is very common among children.
They
on the
don't
spectrum.
answer when you call because they don't respond. So being that person. So what I had when my son was young, like I said, the church, they just had a team. They called them his buddies. And when I walked into that building, somebody took him from me. And they learned, you know, how best, and they would just walk with him or go play with him or take him to class if he could that day. And just the chance to be my own human being for an hour is such a gift. And if you can offer that to somebody, if you can go sit with a mom with her child, so she can go to the bathroom by herself, just that is such a gift. Do not underestimate what you can be to somebody with just that little bit of time.
Or you can go take a shower, which you couldn't have done in like 2 days, right? And
the other thing,
yeah, I just want to say one other thing about for those families who have kids on the spectrum that don't have family near you. This is what we had to do. We're the only ones in our family out here in this area. We would pack both kids up, drive an hour from Loudoun to PG County, drop them off at the grandparents or aunts or uncles or whoever was watching them. We would go out for maybe 2 hours, come back, pack them up, and drive an hour back home. And that's what we had to do if we needed to get a break. So if anybody who's listening to this, if you have family near you, close to you, you are extremely blessed. We didn't have that. So
we were 14 hours away from ours. So
build your own community. I got tired of driving to Maryland, so I had to get like 5 or 6 babysitters that I could call on at any time. So you figure it out.
Another thing that I learned through my friend's son, Andrew, is that he liked having my children who are the same, I have a set of twins the same age as he is around, even if it didn't seem to me that he was interacting with them at all. Carrie, their mom, could say that it made Andrew happier when my kids were there, but the interaction wasn't the same. And she said she had a lot of trouble setting up play dates, even her son, though her sons enjoyed them, because it made other moms uncomfortable. And I mean, I asked because obviously I can ask uncomfortable questions because I don't realize they're uncomfortable. But so, I mean, I think be willing to ask that question of, you can have a play date between, all 3 of the boys are 14, even if they aren't interacting the same way they normally, what I would expect. What I see as typical, the interactions may be atypical, but it was still valuable and fun for Andrew. And it was fun for my boys too. It just took my boys a while to get used to it. But my hope is normalizing these interactions will be good for everybody.
I was going to say, your kids will be different because of that. That's really, really important. They'll be better because of that.
Thank you, Teresa.
Thank you, Teresa. Yes, sincerely, Teresa, thank you so much. And not just for the show, but also for all the work you're doing. It's helping the world.
You're doing great work. And I really want to keep in touch with you.
All right.
Please do. There's thanks coming from some of the viewers too. I was reading some of the comments. I put some of the links that you spoke of, Teresa, in the comments for Autism Speaks. And I did find, did you say respite care?
Respite care.
I found, yeah, they have a division inside of that same organization. So I put that there as well.
I put in the link to the Department of Labor website for autism resources, and it has the Job Accommodation Network on there and a bunch of really great, it's a nice categorization of all different resources for how we can learn more about autism, help folks on autism in the workplace. If you have an employee, how you can help your kids. It's a really great resource.
That's awesome. thank you so much for coming.
Thanks for
We
doing
got
this.
to have you back again, just to kind of help guide some parents through it. Because I know sometimes, you know, it's difficult just hearing some of those stories. You know, just to be able to give somebody help to go, you know, take a shower or to have a moment to themselves, on top of being a mom, and then being a mom that has to deal with other things too. So maybe we can come back and do something on how we can be an advocate to parents in that situation. If you wouldn't mind, that would be great.
Be great. There's some good stuff for after too. I mean, you know, when my son was diagnosed, he got PDD-NOS at first, pervasive developmental disorder not otherwise specified, which means nothing. And then later autism. And you what is in front of you is a black hole. Like, to me, it wasn't bad, it wasn't good. There was just nothing. I had no idea what that meant for him. And there's a reason for that, because you don't know, because each person is entirely different. And that there's no, you know, my child is blind, there's a certain set of things that are going to have to happen. Autism, it's a crapshoot. But what you need to know as a parent right now is, down the road, there are companies who want to hire your child because they are autistic, not despite it, and because of their strengths. And hopefully by the time, you know, if your child is young right now, by the time they get to where they graduate, there's going to be even more if I do my job right. And there are schools, there are universities out there that have whole teams of people that will help your child be successful in school. There are jobs made specifically for them. There's a lot out there, and it's only getting more, and it's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. It's going to be good. Hang in there. It's hell when they're little, and I ain't gonna lie, but it's gonna be all right.
And that's a great note to have parents here tonight and to end on. So thank you so much again, Teresa, Kim, Vanessa, Jamie. Thank you for your time tonight. As always, we couldn't do this without you. People are really thankful for what you all bring and what you do. And again, I want to take a moment for myself just to say thank you for what you do. And we will be back next week. We'll be doing a different show next week. It'll be on, our guest will be Fair Vote Virginia. And so we look forward to that conversation, because it's a different way to vote, people. So that's going to be an interesting conversation, because we haven't talked politics in a while in this nature. So Kim, get ready.
Get ready. I'm ready.
You know I'm ready.
Always want to talk politics.
Yep, that's going to be a great one. So thank you for this great show, and you all have a great night. Ladies, hang on for a second, but you can say goodbye to everybody.
Bye, everybody. Have a
Bye,
great week.
everybody.